Welcome to The Struggle is Real, a show for 20-somethings that are trying to figure out adulting. I'm your host, Justin Peters. Each episode, we focus on solving a problem that we will face throughout this defining decade that wasn't covered in the classroom. This could include topics about our career, health, relationships, and money. Let's get into it. Our teenage years present many challenges. One universal obstacle that I saw few of us avoid was the trap of comparing ourselves to others, particularly our physical bodies. Someone was always thinner, more muscular, prettier, taller, even had better skin. Many of those thoughts and feelings never went away, but progressing through our 20s, we not only realize, but start to believe there are way more important facets of ourself than our outward appearance. Realizing it and getting there are two different things though. It's hard to embrace and embody all of our physical attributes, especially those areas we've always been insecure about and others that are becoming more apparent as we age. Even though I'm not quite sure I'll ever fully get to loving my entire body, there are actions my guest believes that we can take to get closer. I'm excited to introduce you to Sophie Killip, a mental health counselor and coach. Sophie's philosophies include working towards body acceptance, embracing size diversity, and looking at health from a holistic viewpoint, not one singular measurement like weight. We have a great conversation about why fat is not a feeling, normalizing body diversity, replacing self-criticism with self-compassion, and much more. I hope you enjoy my conversation with the compassionate, insightful, authentic Sophie Killip. Sophie, super excited to have you on the podcast. A little nervous, honestly, because this is a topic that isn't necessarily in my sweet spot or my wheelhouse. I invited you on the podcast, though, because you're really approachable, and I feel like you're the perfect person to come along in this journey and kind of push me into this uncomfortable zone. You're real, but you're not going to be like scholarly in this whole conversation. Like you're just going to provide this rawness and this realness that I think I really need in this conversation. So I'd love to start out with just a little bit of definitions that I think need to be defined as we're going to probably use them throughout this conversation. And that's body positivity and body neutrality. I've definitely heard the phrase body positivity a lot. I never really heard the phrase body neutrality. I'm not exactly sure what's the difference between the two and what is the important distinction between them.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. That was such a nice introduction, and I feel very honored to be here and kind of help in this process for you, and to also just highlight that I'm definitely on my own journey. You know, I have my experience and this is kind of my area of expertise, but I am learning every single day on this subject, and I think it's growing all the time. So to go off of your first question, body positivity and body neutrality, body positivity is usually the term that most of us have heard about. I think it's become this big buzzword, and actually it started off with the fat rights movement. So this was led by Black queer women, and I think that it's really important to remember that, because body positivity was all about, and still is, it's all about loving and celebrating your body for what it is, regardless of its shape or size. So that's body positivity, and that might kind of be centered around like the way it looks, but also what it does for you. And so body neutrality, I believe, kind of came after body positivity. I think it dates back to around like 2010 from what I've researched so far. And body neutrality is not having positive or negative emotions about your body. It's knowing that you are so much more than your body, and your worth is not defined by the way that you look. And I actually used to think that body neutrality and body acceptance were like interchangeable terms, but I've come to learn that there's this other term called body acceptance, which is just accepting your body for the way that it is. So they're probably quite similar to one another, but I think it's probably important that we kind of distinguish those three terms, and to just know that they are kind of slightly different from one another. And as a person, you know, you can really like weave in and out of them, but each of them is really there to kind of figure out which one maybe you feel as though you fit into more. And not everybody is going to experience that like love and appreciation for their body every single day. So that's why I think having something like body neutrality or body acceptance, it takes the pressure off, basically, which obviously we can talk a bit more about.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for that definition. I think I understand the difference now between neutrality and acceptance as well, which was really helpful. Are those recent terms? I know you like a lot of the research and you're pretty heavily involved in this space. Did neutrality and acceptance pop up recently?
Yeah, I mean, I was always really about positive body image for a long time. And I would say it's only been in the past like year or two where I've really delved a lot deeper into this area, that I've become familiar with body neutrality. I mean, body acceptance, I feel like it kind of is what it says on the tin, it's probably something that like I knew existed, but I think it's really becoming more of a movement, like the body positivity movement is.
I'm kind of curious. It seems like I'm really interested to get your opinions on it, kind of where we've come. You posted, I remember you and I were chatting on Instagram maybe a month ago or so, and you posted this interview from the 90s and just like how unwoke it was, like this interviewer asking about this actress's weight. And it was just like really, really gross. I feel like we've made a lot of strides even since like the 90s. Obviously, both of us are in our 20s, so we don't really have like a lot of hindsight in terms of where we're coming from and where we are now. But do you feel like this movement is in the right direction? Has it stayed flat, or are we going the opposite direction here?
Yeah, we've definitely come a long way. Oh my gosh. When I looked at that video, and just for reference, it was a part of a documentary of the Spice Girls where it highlights all of the criticism that they received from different people on TV. There's this one scene with Victoria Beckham, and she's just had one of her sons, and so the talk show host is saying like, "Oh, have you got back to your weight? Oh, let's weigh you on the scales." And she literally steps on the scales, and they make sure that she is at a quote unquote like normal weight. I didn't know whether to just feel like nauseous or to just feel so incredibly angry. Yeah. So I definitely think that we have come a long way based off of videos like that. And actually, what you were saying about maybe not being as aware of kind of the impact that maybe like the media or social media can have on you until you are in your 20s. I think that we didn't realize the impact when we were like children or teenagers, because think about like all of these magazines and there's quite a few different Instagram influencers that post these like old magazines from the 90s of just absolutely punishing and criticizing mostly women, but also men and, all people for the way that they look, as like a headline to literally reel people in. So if that's the stuff that we were seeing all the time when we were younger, we're going to be ingraining all of that as we grow into teenagers and then into our 20s. So yeah, I think we have definitely come a long way. I think that there is still more to go. And I think that with body positivity, even though the intention behind it is really great, the marginalized bodies that the people that actually started it, that didn't feel as though they fit into this ideal of beauty, they've kind of been pushed out. Because actually, when you look at body positivity, especially on a social media platform like Instagram, most of the pictures that get the most attention and the most likes are from like thin white women. And so that's kind of why body neutrality and body acceptance became a bigger movement. So I just think that we need to be careful around like what we're actually advocating for here, and to really highlight that this is not just about like one type of body. This is about all bodies, especially those that are marginalized. And I do think that as a society, we still are very fat phobic, and we see being fat as this bad thing. You know, if you like, well, I would say probably more so for women, but if you receive a compliment, it's often around like looking thin. And then even like for men, it's about like looking toned or muscular. And this word fat, we use it in a very negative way. And I think we need to let go of that. I think we need to ditch this idea that being fat or having fat on our bodies is a bad thing. So there's definitely a long way to go in that sense.
Yeah, let's put a pencil in our thoughts around fat right now. I want to get back to it because I'd love to pry a few more things out of you there. But you're right. I just looked up the body positivity hashtag on Instagram, and I don't know if it's my my algorithm, but yes, you're right. Most of what I'm getting, at least a third of the pictures here, are thin, white fitness ladies.
Yep.
And I'm like, I'm not sure if that's what this hashtag is trying to encompass right now, which is actually
not
really
what
interesting.
It's not what body positivity is about either. It's about like loving and celebrating all bodies. And yes, let's celebrate the bodies that do fit into the beauty ideal, but let's have that same energy towards marginalized bodies as well. And let's see more diversity on platforms like social media and just generally, you know, within media and Hollywood and things like that. So, yeah, it's definitely taken a bit of a strange turn. And I also think that because of it being this buzzword, companies are profiting off of it. So they know that, you know, plus size fashion and using the word body positivity and just slapping it at the front of what they do is going to get people's attention. In fact, apparently plus size fashion is a $180 billion industry for women. For men, apparently it's a $1 billion industry. So I'm like, what? What is going on?
That's the big and tall section in the back there. Like we don't necessarily have the same connotation around that.
No. So that there's a lot of money in this. And I think that is also part of the problem. So it just feels like the power has kind of been taken away in some ways. But, you know, if we look at it from like, if we look at this objectively, positive body image is all about reframing negative thoughts about the way you look into more positive self-talk. And that I think is great. And I think if you can achieve that, then that is brilliant. But nobody should feel the pressure to constantly feel positively about the way we look when we live in a world that has got so much pressure and so much criticism around what we should or shouldn't look like.
Yeah, it's an interesting world that we're in right now because we, in one sense, we have like these rise of superstars like Lizzo and Kim Kardashian that don't necessarily would be the 90s like role model body, beauty body that's out there that everybody was striving for. So I think the rise of some of these celebrities and how they've embraced their own bodies has really helped progress this movement towards body positivity and body acceptance in general. Do you feel like, is there a celebrity or a brand? I know you mentioned there, you know, a lot of brands are just slapping the label on and profiting from this, but from in your own opinion, is there a celebrity or a brand that's really embracing this movement the right way?
The one that I can think of is Aerie, which is based in America, you know, like the American Eagle. I think Aerie is like the underwear / swimwear brand.
Okay.
For a long time. Have you heard of this brand?
I don't think so. How do you spell it?
Really? Aerie. Yeah. So American Eagle has like another brand, I don't know if it's like a sister company or if it's like underneath. So they have a campaign called Aerie Be Real. And they've been doing that actually for well, a long time, in my opinion, several years at least, before all of this really, really blew up. And so it's all about they don't retouch any of their photos. They try and get models that have more kind of a quote unquote normal figures. Iskra Lawrence, my gal, she has been one of my big inspirations, and she has really always been about body positivity and, you know, loving yourself for the way that you look and just celebrating your body. And I do think that she is a great role model. So if I had to pick one brand, it would be Aerie. And unfortunately, they don't have Aerie in the UK, but hopefully they will one day. And if they do, I want to be an ambassador for them.
Well, I'm sure this is a big brand. I'm like the worst shopper in the world. I really try to avoid like doing any kind of shopping whatsoever. I think my girlfriend buys the majority of my clothes. So in terms of like shopping brands and clothing brands in general, I'm super out of touch. So take that for what it's worth. But let's pick the conversation back up with fat. And I've heard you mention that fat is not a feeling. You have these like 6 core feelings, and saying I feel fat isn't really describing how you feel. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I think usually when we describe fat, or when we say I feel fat, we're in a negative way, and it kind of covers up the actual emotion that's behind that. So what we might actually mean is that we feel ashamed of our bodies. We feel disgusted with our bodies. We feel guilty for eating something that has too many calories in, or something like that. So I just encourage people to, next time they might have a thought like that, to kind of delve in a bit deeper, like what are you actually feeling here? And so the 6 core emotions, hopefully I'll remember all of these, is so joy, sadness, anger, afraid, ashamed, lonely. And then from each one of those core emotions, there are other ones. Maybe it's jealousy, maybe it's fear, maybe it's feeling excited, feeling compassionate, you know. So if you can kind of check in with yourself by the actual feeling, that's really where you get to the bottom of what's going on there. And I think we need to challenge this idea that fat is seen as something that is really bad, that fat is unhealthy, because actually that is not true.
So what's your response to the argument that weight is a measurement of your health? It's a biomarker that's out there that has, you know, that people are claiming has significant on your health. How would you respond to something like that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a dietitian as such, but I know that weight is just one part of your health. It is not the be all and end all, and you can have health at different sizes. So you have to consider other factors like your mental health, your physical health, your spiritual health, even. And there are so many things that can play a big part in how we feel in general.
If weight isn't the goal, are you saying that this holistic well-being is something that you strive for? Or yeah, let's bring it into your specific context. Like I said, if I'm guessing weight was a measurement that you might have been attuned to in your earlier life, and you've hopefully let that go now. What are you striving for? What's kind of your goal, especially around health?
I tend to focus on how I'm actually feeling and what I feel as though my body needs. So the more I can kind of connect with what's on the inside, and I really like the term embodiment because it encompasses our subjective experience, what's really going on the inside. Whereas the term body image, I mean, it is definitely like a generalized word, and I do still use that, but it does sort of relate to maybe how we're being perceived by other people, how we're being perceived by society. So really embodying this idea of health. Okay, what does my body need right now? What does my mind need right now? Because, and this is something that's probably very much up for debate, but let's take exercise, for example. We in society often hear this message of like, dig in, keep going, like just, give it your all, give it 150%. And actually doing that can hurt our bodies. We can end up over exercising. We can become obsessed with exercising. We can become hyper fixated on it. And that's not health either. So I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the term orthorexia. It's not actually in the DSM at the moment, but it's this kind of obsession with just being so healthy, to the point where that is all you're thinking about. And from the outside, that person might look like, okay, they exercise a lot, they're eating really well, they're doing this, that, and the other. And actually what's going on in the inside is they're so fearful and panicked that if they eat a piece of chocolate cake or if they have some candy or something, then their body is just going to like erupt and something awful is going to happen, when that's not actually the case. So going back to your question of like, do I believe in a holistic approach to health? Yes, absolutely. And I do think the health at every size approach has some great ideologies behind it that we really need to start getting on board with, because it's such a shameful experience. Somebody that's maybe considered to be overweight, or their BMI is considering them to be obese. I mean, that is just such a shameful experience. And I think that's part of the problem, when it comes to eating disorders and binge eating. Binging happens because we feel ashamed of what our bodies look like and who we are in the first place. So criticizing somebody for being a weight that they shouldn't be is just not going to solve the problem. And there is so much out there around like obesity campaigns. And if you actually read the captions, there's so much judgment behind each of those things, like, getting your body back into shape and really going for it and this, that, and the other. And yeah, I really don't agree with that. And I think we need to be more compassionate and understanding with all of this, that there's actually a big mental part of it as well.
I would agree. In preparation for our conversation, I just went out and downloaded and listened to a lot of conversations around body image. And what I found, a lot of the people speaking on it were like former athletes. So they were like collegiate athletes, and they were hyper obsessed with their weight, their diet, all these different things, especially if they were in like a weight specific sport, like wrestling or rowing was somebody I was listening to. And I could tell the mental toll that it took on her to be in this hyper state for so long, and to like actually let it go. It was quite the transformation. I was actually really, really surprised about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think they also call it like anorexia athletica. So, there's a lot of sports players that can really suffer with this, and they don't realize what they're doing either. That's kind of the trouble with something like body dysmorphia. You don't actually see things for what they are, because your mind is in such a negative and such a anxiety focused state with all of this. When I was actually living in America, I took part in the NEDA walk, the National Eating Disorders Association walk, in Seattle. And there was a baseball player there who spoke about his experience of suffering with anorexia. And I think he actually stopped playing baseball. He was in what's like the professional baseball,
Major League Baseball,
over there.
like
MLB? Yeah. I think he used to play for Seattle Mariners, actually.
Okay.
And his story was it was so wonderful, and the fact that he was just sharing that with all of these people, because that's the other thing with eating disorders, and obviously there's such an overlap with body image, but men and boys are experiencing this more and more as well. It definitely used to be something that was mostly women, and whether it's just that there's more research being done, or whether men are just being more affected by this, is kind of up for debate at this point. But I think a lot of men are actually coming out and speaking about this for the first time as well. So it's not a gender specific issue, that's for sure.
Yeah, I love that we're making strides in that space, because you're right. I don't hear too many people talking about this in general, a little bit more now the older that I get. And if I did hear it, it was usually from a female. Very rarely do I hear my male friends talking about their body and the things they love about it and embody and embrace, and the things they don't necessarily love about it and haven't quite accepted yet, or things like that. I just think I mean, men with talking about their feelings still have a long way to go in general. But I'm so glad that people like this baseball player are stepping up and allowing people to have some courage and almost like give people the authority to go out and talk about it, because inside of that this discussion is hopefully a little bit of healing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just need to normalize talking about a topic like body image when it comes to men and mental health in general. But having role models like him, and I forget his name. I need to need to find his name. I'm sorry that I can't remember it right now. But also like Will Smith, his recent YouTube series, and also have you ever watched the show Jane the Virgin?
No.
Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite shows. And the male actor from that in the show, he's called Raphael, and I've forgotten his name again, but he has a brilliant TED talk about why it's okay for men to cry and be vulnerable and show their emotions. But obviously within the umbrella of mental health, having men actually talk about maybe some of their insecurities around, the pressures that they experience, it's probably quite different than that of women, if we're speaking with like men and women here. But there's that pressure to be muscular and to be tall and to even be like a provider and to have a six pack and to look like the Abercrombie models. But recently there has been more focus on body diversity within men's clothing, and Rihanna's brand Fenty is like one of the first brands to start doing plus sized clothing for men. I don't like the term plus size. I think it's lame, to be honest, because
what would you replace it with?
Nothing. Like why do we have to? Yeah, it's just a size. Like okay, I mean, I guess we have like petite, don't we? But do we really need those terms? Aren't they all just sizes at the end of the day? Maybe it can be helpful to distinguish it, but it really does, like and I'll speak from personal experience here. I have a couple of friends who shop in the petite section, which is absolutely fine. But when we would go shopping and I was a teenager, a couple of them would go off to the petite section. And I remember feeling really quite ashamed of not going to that section and thinking, oh gosh, I wish that I could go to that section. And I don't know why, I don't know what benefit it would have served me, but I did. I just felt this like real shame and sadness that I couldn't go off with them. And, they would have had their own insecurities as well. But just speaking from personal experience, this is something that I clearly started to struggle with when I was a teenager. And I probably didn't even realize it, or I probably wasn't able to give it a name at the time.
Yeah, it's really fascinating that we come out of the womb and we're being held and frequently told how beautiful we are, how cute, how adorable, all of these really great positive words. And then by the time puberty hits, we have all of these negative thoughts around our body, just like you were mentioning here, going to the mall and shopping with your friends and not being able to shop in the petite section. I mean, there's countless examples of how that shows up. And it's really kind of fascinating that like even like an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old is attuned to some of these really specific like societal norms or behaviors that are being kind of thrust out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even go as far to say that this stuff starts around the age of like 4 or 5, which is so shocking. But that is what the research is telling us, that young people, boys and girls, are expressing body dissatisfaction at such a young age now. And yeah, it's like the coming out into planet Earth, this like amazingly beautiful experience, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, a baby. And if you look at like a baby, it usually has a lot of like chub, doesn't it? Babies
Mm-hmm.
are just cute and squishy and they're so nice to look at. And like, you look at their like chubby belly and their chubby legs, and you think of it as this really adorable thing. But then let's say you look at a 10-year-old that has chubby legs or a chubby tummy, and then it becomes a problem. And then there's that question of like, oh, are the parents overweight as well? Oh, what is that child eating? Oh, and there's all this judgment that comes into play. Like, why is it that we go from being birthed and it being this adorable experience to have chub, and then being 10 and that not being okay? It's mind-blowing to me, and I have no idea how it all started.
Hmm. Do you want to be a parent yourself?
I do. Yeah. Not right now.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I'm in the
Yeah, but
same boat as you. Have you given any thought to ways you might raise your child differently in terms of hopefully getting them to an age where, of course, I think it's got to be a struggle to ever get a teenager to teenage years without a little bit of struggle or negativity around their own body image. But have you thought about things that you might do differently as a parent that would help or bridge that?
yeah, I have thought about it. I don't have like a list of things that I'm definitely going to do, but things just pop into my head from time to time. I definitely think just normalizing normal bodies and making sure that they're exposed to body diversity, and to just kind of catch them. Like if I notice them, like maybe judging somebody else for the way that they look, to really kind of like challenge them on that. And even let's say like when they are watching a movie or when they're watching TV of some kind. I mean, as a parent, you obviously can't control every single thing that your child digests in terms of what they look at. But if there is something about whatever movie they're watching where there really isn't that diversity or normalization, to challenge that. You might not always see on the TV what you might actually see in real life, and really helping them to kind of realize that from a young age. Also, probably the biggest thing that I will try and avoid is just commenting on their appearance in general, because, appearance does not need to be the thing that we value the most in life. And especially with younger girls, the compliment might be, oh, you look so pretty in that dress. Oh, you're going to be beautiful when you're older. And it doesn't need to be about that all the time. I want my children to know their worth outside of their appearance. And actually, I had one of the sweetest experiences the other week where a friend of mine at work, actually, she had her kids in the office. They were playing darts and whatnot. And they asked me to get them something. And I thought that they were twins because they look really similar. And the boy said, no, I'm actually older than her, and we're the same height, but it's okay because I know that I'm still amazing, even though I'm not really tall, or like something along those lines. And he was 10, and I nearly started crying. I was like, that is so sweet. And I said to my friend, I was like, you have raised your children well. Like the fact he can say that at that age, and just know that like it's not a problem that he's not like as tall as the other kids, or that his sister is the same height as him, even though she's a year younger, is amazing. And we need those kind of conversations from a younger age as well. I think of it as like you're going up the channel and you're trying to be as preventative as possible, because we learned a lot of like our negative body image stuff when we were children and teenagers, and that's because we didn't know like how to handle it. I don't blame teachers or parents or people out there, we didn't know what the helpful thing to do was. So it's important to remember that, and to just see all of this as a learning experience. And as soon as we learn something that is good, to offer that to the people around us. Is there anything that you've thought of?
Yeah, I through researching you, one big takeaway that I took was just really thinking about the compliments that you share out. And I can definitely recall many times that I've said, wow, you look amazing. It looks like you've lost weight. And to me, obviously there's no bad intent behind that. And I was just thinking about, and maybe you can offer some better suggestions for compliments. Like what are some things that maybe you use with your friends that don't necessarily revolve around weight or their appearance in general?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that is so true. You can still compliment somebody about maybe, I don't know, the energy that they're giving off, or something about the way that they look, without it being around weight and around needing to look a certain way. So, for example, you might say like, oh, I love your smile in that picture. You look so happy there. Or it's so good to see you today. You're a breath of fresh air. Just commenting on kind of how they show up around you. It might even be like, oh, I love your hair today, or I love the outfit that you have chosen. And so it just, it takes the pressure off of, or it takes the focus away from seeing it as this like positive thing because you've lost weight. And I still get those comments now. I actually got a comment like that the other day, and I didn't feel offended, which was amazing. So somebody said to me like, oh, have you lost weight? It looks like you've definitely lost a few pounds. And I was really taken aback. I was like, oh wow. I haven't heard anything like that in a while. And old me would have been like, yes, like I'm going to go on another run. I'm going to skip a meal. I'm going to do something. And I didn't get that like gratification that I used to get, which makes me really happy that I don't care about those kind of comments anymore. But also I didn't feel offended at the same time.
So I think that's the crux of the conversation today that I really want to dive into. How did that transformation happen? How did you get to the Sophie that you were describing prior that would have really accepted that compliment, been enthusiastic about that accomplishment, maybe even used it as fuel to continue to pursue weight loss and this journey, to someone that's like, thanks, that's really nice, but it really didn't affect you in the way you were thinking about yourself?
Mm-hmm. I think I just had this big wake up call that no matter how much weight I lose, no matter how much I try and perfect my appearance, that is not the thing that's going to make me the happiest. Because actually, when I was probably the most obsessed with my appearance, I don't think I was that happy. And I just had this realization of, oh my gosh, it's not about the way that I look. It's about how I feel on the inside, and my relationships, and how connected I feel to the people around me, the people that I love and care about and trust. And I don't think that there was necessarily like one day where it happened, but as somebody that is very interested in this topic in general, I've really exposed myself to many influential people, thought leaders, people on Instagram, TED Talks, books, you name it, that don't think in the way that I used to think. And sometimes it takes me a bit of time to remember that actually, like, some of the people around me still get sucked into that mentality. And that's just not what I surround myself with anymore. So yeah, it's been a journey for sure. And I'm 27 now. I would say that I really started to truly overcome this stuff probably only in like the last year or two. Because even prior to that, I think just like being at university and being in your early 20s, like you really have a lot of insecurities. That's from personal experience as well. And I also think from the people around me, is that something you can like relate to?
100%. I mean, I still have a lot of insecurities. That's for sure. I like admire the thing I love about like grandparents or just like that like, 60, 70, 80 plus year olds is just like how candid and like unfazed they are about so many things in life. And my grandma was telling this story the other day, that she was like at this grocery store trying to get something on the top shelf. She's very short. She's like under 5 foot, and it like things fell, and it would have been like a really embarrassing moment. Like I was like kind of cringing a little bit listening to the story and be like, oh my gosh, grandma, did that really happen? She didn't care whatsoever. She was just sharing it because she thought it was like a really funny story. And like, I just admire that so much about older people in general. But yes, the older I get, the more I'm able to just laugh at myself and look past some of these things. But that's to say, I still have a lot of insecurities about a lot of different things.
Yeah. And I definitely struggle with insecurities as well. I think it's just maybe not so much about the way I look anymore. And it's probably shifted more to, I don't know, like my abilities and my competence levels and things like that. But definitely compared to my early 20s, I'm a lot less insecure about just, a lot of things. So, for those of you that are in your early 20s, hang on in there. It is a bit of a rough ride, but a question that I like to challenge myself or ask myself is, okay, imagine myself as like an 80-year-old, and will I care about the things that I care about now? So, if you're worried about like your stomach or your legs or your nose or your teeth or your lips or whatever, will 80-year-old you really care about that? Because actually, we only have one life. And usually we look back at pictures of ourselves and think, oh, wow, like I actually look quite nice there. And I thought I looked awful. So just remembering that it's so easy to hyper focus on whatever perceived flaws you have, and try and just like take a picture of yourself and notice maybe or name like one thing that you actually do like about the picture. Because we're so easy to just jump to, oh my gosh, this, like, I don't like this, I don't like that. And that was very accepted, especially when I was younger, like growing up and everything. But just like challenging yourself, pick out something that you do like, pick out, I don't know, the smile or like how you felt in that moment of when you took that picture, because that's the thing that really counts.
So do you have more to share around replacing this self-criticism with self-compassion or kindness, maybe even go as far as say confidence? Is there some steps that you took in your journey that really helped tone out the self-criticism and turn up the self-compassion?
Yeah. So with self-criticism, where do we start with this? It's so big.
It's hard because like what I found really interesting about this journey is like you finally get a little bit of realization around how much self-criticism that you've done. And then you start criticizing yourself about criticizing yourself. And that's not helping either. It's like, okay, like I can't continue to beat myself up about beating myself up because I'm just putting that self-criticism into a different lane of energy.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just that vicious cycle, isn't it? Of criticizing yourself for criticizing yourself. And in Buddhism, they call that the second arrow, where like in life, we all experience suffering. But what we do is we get frustrated with ourselves for suffering or for being critical, for feeling anxious, for not feeling happy all of the time. And we punish ourselves so much more than we need to. So the way that I look at the inner critic is it's likely not just going to disappear, especially overnight. So if you can focus more on tuning down the critical thoughts that you have about yourself rather than getting rid of them altogether, that in itself just feels so much more realistic. So let's say you feel as though your inner criticism is like at volume 100. Okay, what do you need to do to try and get it down to like a 70 or a 60 instead? So one of the things that I encourage people to say is to just say out loud, I notice that I am having the thought of I'm not good enough, or I look ugly today, or I feel fat. So I notice that I'm having the thought that, and then whatever it is. And what that does is it just separates you from the thought itself. One of the biggest revelations I've probably ever had is that our thoughts and our feelings are not us. They are just something that we experience. So you are not going to have the same thought all day, every day for the rest of your life. It's something that comes and it's something that goes. So use your observing eye. If you kind of like imagine yourself looking down at yourself from like a bird's eye view and say it, I notice that I'm having the thought that, or I notice that I'm feeling that. And you don't necessarily have to do anything with it. Maybe it's just that like you give yourself a hug or something and kind of say it back to yourself. It often sounds really mean. And another exercise that might be quite helpful is kind of writing down some of the self-critical thoughts that you say to yourself, grabbing a photo of like a younger version of yourself and saying them to that younger version of yourself. Chances are you're going to be like, oh, that really cuts so deep. So just by giving yourself that space to like gain perspective, to maybe question the validity of the self-criticism in the first place, and to know that self-criticism, it's not helpful. Often we think of it as this thing that like, okay, if we put ourselves down, if we punish ourselves, if we criticize ourselves, we'll do better. And I don't know about you, but that method does not work for me. So reframing those thoughts of like, okay, I don't feel good enough right now. Well, why don't you feel good enough? And what could you say that's just a bit more like understanding and compassionate to yourself? Maybe it's just that you don't have to have all of the answers right now. This is a learning process. Being in your 20s especially is all about growing and learning and kind of changing that critical mindset to one of curiosity. Like, what is actually going on here? What's at the root of this? And that's where we really start to build that self-awareness and we get to know ourselves even better.
I think that's a really great exercise, maybe a challenging exercise, but you can imagine yourself, you wouldn't say some of the things that you say to yourself to a younger sibling or a younger version of yourself or a best friend. So speaking to yourself the same way you would speak to one of those three, I think might be a good starting place to start to detach yourself from the thoughts that you're having. And also just being okay, kind of being in the gray as well. I think Talk 20s, which you're an ambassador of, had this post out there about, you know, being in the gray and kind of being on the fringes on two different things. Like you can be vulnerable, but you can also feel powerful. Like you can be capable, but you can also feel lost. You can feel sociable, but you can also feel lonely. Like you can have competing feelings and thoughts sometimes, and that is okay. That is part of being human. And I think there might be some interest in exploring like accountability versus self-criticism or this inner critic. I think there is a delineation between the two, because I often challenge the listeners to be accountable and to do these things that they're not currently doing with their life, but not at the expense of your own, your own thoughts and feelings about yourself as well. I think accountability helps you learn and grow and change, while blaming yourself and, embracing this inner critic really focuses on punishment, and it can be super toxic.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And just to go back to that, of course, you can feel two things at the same time. And, let's take you, for example. You just shared that you do have these insecurities, and yet here you are doing this podcast and really like pushing yourself to learn about all of these different topics. So yes, you might feel insecure, and you're also willing to push yourself, and you might feel confident in other areas of your life as well. So it's okay to feel both of those things at the same time. And secondly, yes, of course, there is a huge difference between accountability and blame or self-criticism. moving away from self-criticism does not mean, oh yes, like let's just sort of let ourselves go and do whatever we want and not do anything and be really like really unproductive and be a massive slob. You know, it doesn't have to swing all the way to the other side. You can still say, okay, maybe I didn't do that as well as I could have done, or maybe next time I will do it this way. Maybe I'm trying to think of like some other examples at the moment. So I recognize that what I did not work out for the best. And next time I'm going to do it this way instead. And I realize that this is all a learning process. So, you know, you're learning, you're growing, you're healing all at the same time.
Agreed. So Sophie, as we conclude this conversation, I'd love to leave someone with one, maybe two challenges. They really gained a lot of insight from our conversation today. They want to move towards body positivity, neutrality, acceptance. What could be something that they could do maybe this week, or like a challenge they can embrace to start sliding that direction?
So one of my favorite exercises is the gratitude, body gratitude. And this is something that listeners may have already heard of, but it's very specific to our bodies and how we feel about them. So instead of focusing on what your body looks like, what it shouldn't look like, whether you like it or not, whether you feel positively or negatively, focus instead on what your body can actually do for you. So the amazing thing about our bodies is that they are a vessel. They're not an ornament. They are a vehicle. They are something that really allow us to live life and to get this full experience of being on earth. So an example of feeling grateful for what our bodies can do for us is I feel grateful for my legs because they allow me to travel around the world. Or I feel grateful for my arms because they allow me to give my grandma a hug. You know, something that our body can do for us that allows us to just experience all of the joys in life. Even I love my eyes because they allow me to see beautiful places in the world, and really just spend time, not just writing the sentence down and closing your book, but relishing that feeling of gratitude, because gratitude is a positive emotion and we can access joy and happiness through expressing it. So I'd say that's probably a really kind of quick exercise that you can do. Challenge yourself to do it for like every day for a week or something like that. Write down 3 things that you feel grateful for about what your body can do.
I love that so much. Sophie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for being gentle on me in this conversation and exposing me to so many interesting concepts that I really wanted to dive a little bit deeper into. If people resonated with something that you said today, where would be the best place for them to connect and follow you on your journey?
So at the moment, it would be my Instagram, and my handle is at Counselor Sophie, and counselor is spelled COUNSELLOR. So it's a double L because I live in the UK.
Awesome. And we'll put that to the show notes. Can you share about any projects that you're working on, or do you still want to keep that under wraps?
I've got a couple of things that I'm working on at the moment. I'm kind of delving really deep into my business, and that's something that's super exciting for 2022. So stay tuned. I've got a lot of helpful content to put out there, and I would love to get to know anybody that has resonated with me. Feel free to just send me a message, and let's build a community on social media and actually use it for good.
Love that. Awesome. So Sophie, my final question for you. If you had the opportunity to teach a 16-week class to a group of graduating college seniors on a topic that isn't normally covered in the classroom, what would you teach and how would you teach it?
This was a really hard question because there are so many things that I would want to learn more about. And, you know, having been in that position as well, I assume what you mean by graduating college seniors is university level, right? So my mind kind of took me to, it's quite a scary world out there when you graduate. And there's just a lot of anxiety about what everything is going to look like. So I think I would just want to offer a class that gives people a space to really express feelings of anxiety, maybe the insecurities that they have, and almost make it as more of like a process group. So like this place for people to share, people to be vulnerable, and to offer some psychoeducation around how to deal with emotions and how to deal with difficult thoughts and maybe lack of confidence when you take that big leap from being at university to being in a job, and just reminding people that, you know, they can still do so many amazing things and it doesn't have to work out straight away. So I'm not sure what exactly I would call that class as such, but just a normalization of the realities in life so that they actually feel equipped with the skills on how they can manage their mental health, how they can cope with things if they don't kind of go perfectly. Something that I really struggle with even now is perfectionism and this kind of need for everything to be perfect. So helping graduating college seniors in kind of working towards that more recovering perfectionist mindset, in that like healthy striving is great, but we don't all have to be perfect straight away.
Wow, that's probably one of my favorite answers that I've heard on the podcast. So I really appreciate you sharing. Sophie, it's been an absolute pleasure. As always, you're always welcome to come back on if you have something interesting to talk about.
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I'm so glad we got to connect.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you like this conversation today, be sure to subscribe so you'll be notified about new episodes. If you want to connect with me, send me a message on Instagram. I'm at Justin Lee Peters. You can find show notes with links to everything we discussed today at justinpeters.co. This episode was produced by Gabby Dimeke. I'm your host, Justin Peters. Thanks for tuning in.